May I suggest one thing? There are some really interesting conclusions which I think you should try to draw out of your experience. And in your case, it was the assumption of density. But the conclusions, if you start seeing a pattern of conclusions of the experience, you say, well, wait a minute, maybe there's a need for really doing a much more deep study of some of this stuff. And so don't hesitate to make generalized conclusions as maybe there's a real issue here from the exercise. Onwards. Try to keep it around 5 minutes. Short.
So we are the aggressive developer team. We're out there to make as much money as we can and to accommodate all these people who we know are coming to our region. We're going to have climate refugees, and we need to house these people. Come on. So in our 20-year plan, first of all, we've built off the existing and projected transportation infrastructure. So there will be a light rail that goes along the east side of the watershed, and expansion of the train and bus lines that go across. And we've actually made this extra piece here that cuts across the valley, so that there's connections, and there also is a train line that's existing, light rail that runs, or sounder that runs north-south, and there's an existing freeway that runs here. So we've got a connected transportation system that goes from the airport really all the way around the valley, along the ridge line, and out to the east to Maple Valley, and there's a train station in Covington that will be there. That overlays nicely with the expanded utilities that the utility infrastructure team projected, especially going east along this corridor. So those two systems, and we thought this utilities probably need to be expanded here for this high density use. That gets us to how we looked at what the housing should be. And our team decided that rather than use up a lot of land, that we would say that all of the housing, there's no low density housing that would be added, that all of it would be high density housing. And instead of using 12 units to the acre, we assumed that buildings, the average building height would be 6 stories, and that would then be more like 75 units per acre as opposed to the 12 units per acre. So we located in the 20-year plan where those would be, and it's a series of hubs that are connected. So the first hub is around South Center here that would add housing, high-density housing to the existing shopping center. There would be housing somewhat along this corridor, and there would definitely be housing along a series of hubs from Kent up to Covington and east to Maple Valley. And each of those also would have industrial, commercial work centers. So in Maple Valley, it could be University of Washington, like UW-Bothell, could be the East Campus, along with high-tech research. There is currently a hospital in Covington, so we thought that could expand into more of a medical hub. Kent is an aeronautical center. That could become bigger to serve if Boeing is to stay or expand. This is more of the retail around South Center, along the airport. It could be an industry like Amazon, or that's using shipping a lot. We never did quite figure out what the Federal Way hub is. You guys might have some ideas about that. This is participatory, right? So the red is the inside the pink is the industrial, and you can see the pattern that the red is surrounded by housing, so that work is close to where people would live. But there's also a way for it to grow. So none of these, Carl's advice, are actually closed circle donuts, but they all have the capacity to expand along the corridor towards the next hub. Am I missing anything?
The open space scheme.
Well, yeah, I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm asking my teammates here.
Not bad.
Got it? Okay. So then, because we want to sell this housing for high prices, we want to make sure there are plenty of amenities. So you can see that we've used all the streams here. The forests along the streams indicate that those are also parks. And we've also very carefully worked around schools to make sure that that's an amenity. And then farmland. We are always going to need some food, and that doesn't really get in our way. So Out here where it's an agricultural production district existing, we've said that should be zoned. We use that diagram of 1 per 20 as the maximum zoning. But then all of the hatched area is good farmland, and those would be voluntary policies. We don't really want to force farmers or force anybody to convert their land. So purchase of development right, transfer of development rights could be applied to those areas. And then finally, the environment. Well, of course, the streams are a good way to protect surface water and habitat. The groundwater here that could potentially be contaminated by the farms would be mitigated by whatever this diagram had in mind.
I'm not sure from whom we got this, but we also kind of
that would be.
Thanks, by the way.
We went with converting forest to a critical area from that team, and we kept the lower green floodplain area in there. So I think that's kind of it. Did I miss anything?
Pretty much it.
Yeah. What did you say?
Is that your 40 scheme?
No, that's 20
That's
years.
the 20.
And then the
40.
40-year scheme is very similar, except so from the transportation and the development plan for the sewer system is very similar. But what changes is that now we're developing alongside those routes and basically filling this in, as you can see here, right? And it's the same idea that we're carefully crafting around all the existing rivers and creeks so that we keep these as amenities so people can actually live there, like to live there. And then we expand also on this line along. And basically it's just replacement. And how we get away with so little area for high density is that we just increase the density. And it's actually, we took also into account that we are taking low density and converting it, and that's actually added on top of the numbers. So yeah, that's basically the 40-year plan.
Even though the graph doesn't show that we met our targets, we exceeded our targets.
Yes.
We calculated it all out.
So, and if not, we put one more story on it.
Okay, so now the lesson. It's what's the ratio of the high density of everybody else to yours? At 75 per acre. They had what?
12.
So it's 5 times more dense, and therefore less affecting the majority of the territory.
And then also the
And by the way, that's roughly the size of buildings that are the dormitories of the University of Washington, the ones out on past University Ave. And that's the cheapest way of building density. It's a wooden building on top of a concrete frame with an elevator.
We made an informal assumption that they might be lower as you got into the more rural areas and taller buildings in the cities. So it might be from 3 to 10 stories.
Okay? Now, take a 1-minute break, a short introduction. Look, this morning I met with these people, and they were one of the developer teams. And I noticed that they were the developers who have to maintain the current circumstance. And I had noticed, obviously, yesterday that all the other teams decided to move to a policy of higher density than the program. And I said, look, you're the developers. The task is to try as much as possible to maintain, and the question is maintain what? Maintain the market profile, right? People don't want to live in the high density housing. They're taking a huge risk on behalf of the environment. But I think what I then, this morning, in a sense, strongly suggested in my way, that what they do is do everything they can to maintain the ratio of high to low density that's in the program of forecasting that Tim prepared for the work. The question is, what does it mean to maintain the low density profile of the market?
I'll go ahead and start. So I'm Mira, this is Wheeler 1, and we had Group 2, which were developers maintaining, as you just said, the land use pattern and density as it is. So when we originally did our top priorities, it didn't look like this, but we rearranged it this morning to elevate low density housing, which ranked pretty close to transportation at number 2, and then utilities and commercial, industrial, and then high density housing. This is the existing land use, which you see the pattern is highly low, or high density, not high density, but a lot of the land area is covered by low density housing. And if you want to go to the next one, our top 2 priorities when we got this directive was to essentially meet the targets for transportation and low density housing. We didn't really try and meet any of the other targets that were listed, so you'll notice that in our pattern. Yeah. Do you want to talk about it now? So that's
Yeah. So this is 40, but sorry that I couldn't make it for the 20. But basically, like the 20 that we didn't have this area. This area basically is out of the study area, and also not included in this area because this is forest and a little bit high.
the critical area.
Yeah, but basically, like our project that we like to propose is like we welcome new people to this area as well, but we would like them to like not like in the cloud like area, and we have like house around the tree so that it seems like we have forest and we can have house as well, so we can be together. It doesn't mean like we not like no more people or like just come, but we can fit in just a small space, but you can have like a happy life, happy
openings are hours, right?
Yeah, so that it decided to like a little bit more like to focusing like more the low density, and also put more in this area, which is like it's a forest, and also for the far south in this area. At the same time, we look at there's some area that is an agriculture area, but I mean that is not the whole agriculture area, but I think that some of the parcel are small that they can have like a house and can see the farm, beautiful view.
Yeah, but on top of that, in other words, it's yellow with either a forestry policy on top of it or an agricultural policy on top of it. Mm-hmm. But can I ask you a question? I know you're not showing us the 20. And at what time about do you run out of what you consider developable land at this low density?
About like at 20 years.
At 20 years.
Yeah.
And therefore you went into, and at 20 years, were you already in the critical forest? Or
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So between 20 and 40, you had to go outside the study area.
Right.
And if we were studying outside the study area, they would already have had the same policy under your development. So they would have already gotten that land in the 20-year period. What would you do then?
We
No,
would
I'm
have
serious.
to change the development pattern.
Or go even further
Clear
out.
out to right and build a more critical area.
Exactly.
In the national park.
Right. On Mount Rainier.
Well, but that's a very interesting observation. It means that in the existing regulations, the expectation is that the developer is finding one house at a time. I'm caricaturing. It could be 5, it could be 10. But it's not 200. And in this policy, if the developer is a market developer rather than a builder of houses, they're looking for larger sites, and there aren't the larger sites after 20 years. There may be some between now and 20 years. We know there are. But at 20 years from now, you've got a real change in either the developers or the market or the density. That's very important.
But at the same time, we kind of look at the critical area as well, try to escape that area. And there's still some like critical area over here. So we put in the 40-year plan. That area is kind of like a little bit high, but some people might like it because see the beautiful view. And we also try to like try to set back area, not near the stream or the river. That quite important for the salmon in this area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine. Okay. That's an interesting counterpoint. Team number 3.
Okay, so we were team number 3 in development, and we are the enhanced growth restriction team. and that basically means concentrating development within the urban growth area and not sprawling out beyond that. And our project was guided by 6 objectives. The first one was to lead with utilities, so put in utilities before actually trying to put in any high-density housing or commercial and industrial areas. The second objective, as I mentioned, was to stay inside the urban growth area, which basically extends out to Black Diamond and kind of snakes around. The third objective was to increase high-density housing and mixed use with commercial and industrial. And then we also wanted to support critical areas and forestry, like Team 1 said, to hopefully increase the value of the high-density housing in the area. And the fifth objective, we wanted to not necessarily decrease low-density housing, but just keep it outside of the main transportation corridors where our development was focused.
So I'm going to talk for a moment or two about utilities and just the strategy behind utilities. And we'll just talk about the 20 and the 40 year because the logic is consistent. So first we wanted to connect the dots, if you will, from the towns to the west, the towns to the east, going through Covington, all the way out to Maple Valley. We also wanted to connect Auburn up through to Covington, which is another one of these corridors that we saw as a location for high-density housing at some point. Further, we looked at some of the other promising areas, Black Diamond being one of them, and to a certain extent the downwinders of Black Diamond as well, mostly because of their concern over the new wastewater treatment that's going into Black Diamond to alleviate to allay any fears that they may have about that. And the last point I wanted to make about that is we considered this hatching here as a pilot to just consider a policy for relaxing the utility requirements in this area, but it's an artifact and should have been erased at any rate. So turn it over to John.
So somewhat counterintuitively, we're actually indebted quite a lot to Group 1's diagrams, the relaxed growth restrictions, because their diagrams were both really good and also within the urban growth area, so we thank them for that. One area that we do a little bit differently from them is that we added, to get more high-density housing, this area here to the east of Kent Tukwila is East Hill, and it has several highways where we thought right now the area is mostly low-density residential, and so we thought if we added some utility and some transportation corridors, we could take those areas and move them to high-density residential in the 40 year. Another area we did some mixed use with with high density and commercial was here in Auburn, and we lead with utilities. It's kind of hard to see that it gets darker here in 40 year when we add more of the development, but we lead with the utilities in some of the areas and then come later in the development. With environmental regulations, we're also indebted a lot to Group 1 and to Group, I think it was 5, for a lot of the plans out here, specifically the turning forest into critical area. And that doesn't change much from 20 to 40 year, because if we can just enact the protection, then it might as well. So if we can change it to land use, same basic idea. We couldn't get the existing land use in the background, but it's very similar to Group 1's. So.
But there's a big difference. Their density is 5 times yours, so that if there's a compromise between you and them on density, they may end up wanting to take a gradient and taking some of your expansion areas that they don't have as expansion and build a gradient, because that forces them into needing more high-density areas, and you've already figured out where they might be.
So we found an area inside.
Exactly. So there's a basis for some discussion there, at least.
Okay.
Maybe, if you like.
Maybe. We'll find out.
All right.
What was your rationale for the low density where it is?
Low density, we used the first diagram, the one that got into to Plan 7, and we didn't have a screenshot that's zoomed in enough, but basically Black Diamond is an example where we improved the transportation, both widening the lanes and adding like commuter bus service, and we put high density within maybe a quarter mile there, and low density we preserve or do between that and the edge of the urban growth area. So I think you can see it here a little bit in Black Diamond.